This isn't, or actually it shouldn't be, your parents' educational TV. There is this famous quote by Edison from 1913. Get that straight, 1913. Books will soon be obsolete in schools. It's possible to teach every branch of human knowledge with a motion picture. Our school system will be completely changed in 10 years. So obviously this hasn't happened. But then again, this is what we see happening in the past few years. The Khan Academy, 1 million views of this very interestingly styled chemistry video. So something is actually happening in that respect. Even with my own videos, which are just in German, most of them are in German, you see this phenomenon. In the past 10 months, the total viewing time amounts to 27 years, day and night, 7 days a week. So something is going on in educational video. And I want to discuss what's going on, how we can make that happen, how we can improve on that. I want to start with the history, from videotaped lectures to Salman Khan, talk a little about lightweight video production as opposed to Hollywood-style production or TV-style production. The pitfalls, illusion of learning. You may think you've learned something, you may think you've taught something, but actually it didn't work. Quite a big issue with videos. Then I want to talk about the lean forward experience, how to go past bare educational video, how to do more than that. The final thing is how to get the big picture, how to create a story rather than a set of elements that are unrelated. The history. There's quite some history in educational TV. So in 1957, the New York University and CBS started broadcasting lectures in 1957. Germany started 10 years after that with the Telekolleg, which still runs. It still looks pretty much the same as in those early days, in my view. The image that I have here is from the Open University and BBC. Obviously, that's from the 70s. That's a debatable style. I comment on that. When it comes to lecture recordings, the other part, so to speak, we've got educational TV, and then we've got lecture recordings. That style didn't change very much either. 1964, Richard Feynman explaining gravity, standing in front of a blackboard. And last year, Leonard Susskind explaining gravity, in this case string theory, standing in front of a whiteboard, being filmed in color, but that's more or less the same, even though it's on YouTube now. But lecture recordings didn't change that much over the decades. But this thing was something new. Tutorials on YouTube, this changed something. Salman Khan started in 2007 teaching math to his relatives. And eventually the Gates Foundation came in and Google went in. And that's a different story now. This is not the lecture recordings that we're used to. This is not educational TV that we're used to. It's nothing new as well. From 1981, there's this recording by Donald Knuth, who invented almost everything in computer science. Here he explains the typesetting software, TeX, on a sheet of paper that's videotaped with his hand writing on that paper. Pretty much the same style 3 decades ago. 1 decade ago, Bill Verplank's famous lecture on human-computer interaction. Hand-drawn. While he's speaking, he draws these diagrams, he draws these illustrations. Last year, my Udacity course, still the same style. I write mathematical equations while I talk about them, same style. And it turns out this is what research says it should be looking like. This is multimedia by the book. Richard Meyer is the researcher who is, I guess, the most proficient in that respect, and did tons of studies and wrote the book, or even the books on that topic. For instance, here's something that he calls the coherence principle. Don't add some interesting illustrations or interesting texts, interesting sounds, interesting music to your videos, to your multimedia. It doesn't work. It diminishes the amount of learning. And try to reduce the content to the bare minimum. Do not show a photorealistic picture. Do not tell a long story. Keep it really, really short. Just keep the basics. Make it very clear. This is what we see happening in that type of videos. It's hand-drawn. You do not have a full 3D image representation with every tiny detail. You just have that drawing. Then there's what Meyer calls the redundancy principle and the spatial contiguity principle. If there's a drawing, put labels right into that drawing. Do not put them next to the drawing, put them where they belong. And do not duplicate the narrated text with written text. Just narrate. Keep the screen free of words. No text on the screen, if possible, apart from maybe short words as labels. Again, something that we see in Khan-style videos. The most vital one may be this, the personalization principle. Talk to the audience. Treat the audience like a living person. Be informal. Speak about you and yours. Something that Meyer doesn't mention, but I guess is also of importance here, is not to use a professional speaker. A professional speaker sounds detached. The person who is teaching should be speaking. The perfect performance may be detrimental. Maybe it's good to have imperfections in that video, to sound like a real person, like an authentic person. What Meyer calls the image principle concerns whether or not to show a talking head. And as he found out, the effect of showing the talking head is tiny in contrast to the effects of the other principles. I have experimented with such things, for instance. The face is captured with a webcam. The hand is completely made by computer graphics. Everything is synthesized to create the illusion of a transparent board. This is just the synthesized hand on top of that drawing. I've experimented with these things and skipped doing that because it's way too much effort to control the lighting, to make a test recording, whether this works, and so on and so on. I simply went back to the plain Khan style, where you do not have a talking head, where you even don't have a writing hand. There's some things that Meyer doesn't mention, which I guess are of high importance. First and foremost, you see drawings in progress. You see not a fully formed mathematical equation appearing in one instant. It's written. You see the parts coming into existence. You see diagrams coming into existence. What do I draw first? What do I draw next? How do I think? How do I approach such a diagram? This is something that you can show with hand drawings. It looks handmade and way more accessible than straight lines and perfect circles. And this is what you see with Khan. He rarely edits the videos. I do edit errors out. I guess in his videos there is no editing at all. So you have pauses, you have mistakes, all sort of stuff that you regularly would edit out. The Khan approach got mistaken by many people, I guess. When we look into the MOOCs, the massive open online courses, this is one example. A class on Coursera, obviously on quantum mechanics. I guess this is not this lean approach that Khan uses. This is already something that looks cheap. It's a blend of PowerPoint or some presentation software and poorly organized handwriting. So I guess this breaks the principle. It should be better than that. It should be lean, but it should not be cheap. Which leads me to lightweight video production. How much money do we spend? We've got some ballpark estimates, if you will. Right now in Germany we had this, or even not in Germany, it was not confined to Germany, we had this competition on funding for a MOOC by the Stifterverband and iVersity in Berlin, where they pay 25,000 euros for one MOOC, which should be equivalent to one regular university-style course. On the other hand, we see in the contract that edX, one of the big MOOC providers, has, in the contract of edX, we see for what they call the edX supported model, a base rate of 250,000 US dollars. which is a factor of 10 more. And I wonder what they want to do with that money. But I guess this gives us some ballpark estimates on how much money is spent these days on one course, on producing one course. And I say, well, that could both be too much, even the 25,000 euros. I guess production value is overrated. This is a highly detailed animation provided by On Campus, the German virtual Fachhochschule, University of Applied Sciences. I'd say this is way too much detail. We should be just showing the basic principles. This is distracting. It's hard to understand the principle due to that mass of detail. If we get rid of that, even use a hand drawing, we can do the same in a few hours instead of some weeks and at a fraction of the price. And I guess the effect in terms of learning would even be bigger. So I would question production value. This is what I do. This is what I use in class, actually. It's an old tablet PC, a Microsoft Windows tablet PC, no iPad and no Android. An old-fashioned Windows notebook with pen, plus a USB microphone. That's what I have in class as a replacement for the blackboard. I use free software for recording. It's just screen grabbing, plus some software I've written on my own to have the Creative Commons logos at the beginning. Put time markers for me to say, okay, I should be looking at this thing after 10 minutes and 40 seconds to not watch all of that video again, but look at specific points of time. With the help of that software, that's a video editor that I've developed to be able to focus on audio. Audio appears first and foremost here in this editor with speech recognition. Video is just displayed aside with audio. So this really focuses on audio editing more than on video editing. That's very helpful. You can edit errors out in just seconds instead of waiting for Final Cut to start or Adobe Premiere to start and then trying to get yourself organized with that mass of functions. So I guess specialized software is something that helps a lot. There are errors, there are mistakes. You can't prevent that. I'm a lazy person and do not have any personnel. So what I do is I use YouTube for distribution, and I simply use YouTube speech bubbles, something that you can click in on these videos for annotations to say, oh, this is wrong, I should have been saying this or that. Efficiency is key when producing videos. What I learned is the following. One needs to record in front of an audience. If I sit in the studio, this is what I learned from the Udacity sessions. If I sit in the studio, it takes me 10 times as much to record something as the actual video is going to be in length afterwards. You say one sentence, you correct yourself again, next sentence, and so on. This is not efficient work in the studio. In front of a live audience, you have to go on. You can't repeat the sentence because it had some glitch in it. And it's way easier in front of the audience to show some enthusiasm, to be more focused. In the studio, there's lots of possibilities for mind wandering to not be focused on their task. And what I already said, try to not edit. And what I don't do is I don't review my videos. I've got more than 2,000 videos online on YouTube. I do not review those videos from A to Z. I look at single instance where something went wrong or may have went wrong. In terms of didactics, this is what I learned. I'm using what is called the inverted classroom or flipped classroom. I tell my students to watch last year's videos as preparation, and in the class there's just problems and discussions. And I record those problems again for next year's students. This enables me to interleave tasks with the recording. So I do not record in advance, hoping that the students get what I'm trying to tell them. I'm doing this live in front of the class and can insert interleave problems, quizzes, walk around, look at what's happening, and then provide some more help or give some hints, discuss errors that I've seen. This makes the video way more effective in terms of didactics. And you can use these problems, the recordings of problems, as worked examples. So students have a reference for later use to see how I solve something or how I solve something in cooperation with them. I arrived at didactics. There is one big issue with videos, the illusion of learning. Everybody may think they have learned something, but actually they didn't. This is a recent study on that effect. So this research group created two types of videos, one type with a quote-unquote bad lecture and one type with a quote-unquote good lecture. The good lecturer speaks freely, stands in front of the podium and so on. The bad lecturer leans on the lectern, has to think about every sentence and so on and so on. And then these researchers asked the students whether they thought they learned something. With a good lecturer, everybody thinks they have learned something, but if you put that to the test, it turns out they didn't learn as much as they thought. Actually, they learned as much as with the bad lecturer. So there's this sort of halo effect. You have the good lecturer and think you have learned something, but actually you didn't. This is a dangerous phenomenon. And this happens in other cases as well. There's this seminal work by Derek Muller on misunderstandings. If you show the perfect theory, how something works, like gravity, for instance, force, if you show it's in perfect shape, the students may think they got it, but actually the video reinforced their own misunderstandings. They came into that lecture, that video lecture, with some sort of misunderstanding, and in the end, this misunderstanding was reinforced, not corrected. So what we learned from that, we have to address misunderstandings. The video has to show what can go wrong. We cannot just show the perfect theory without any deviations from that. Maybe there's some sort of specific case of the Dunning-Kruger phenomenon. The less you know, the more you overrate your competency. So it's really hard to rely on surveys and questionnaires in this respect. You really have to check whether or not the students have learned something. That's one issue with lectures, recorded lectures, educational video. There's a general issue with lectures. Lectures are, quote-unquote, relaxing, not activating at all. This is a recording of the galvanic skin response, the resistance of the skin, what you use in a lie detector, in a polygraph. There is hardly any activity in class. And this is nothing new. That's a quote from Feynman. It's impossible to learn very much by simply sitting in a lecture or even by simply doing problems that are assigned. We know that. We've known that for decades, 1964. The idea would be to provide scaffolding, to not just present a lecture, something to watch and listen to, but to help the students to move beyond that, to support them. Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. With support, with scaffolding, we can go further than just with simply providing information. We have to move beyond providing information. And that's hard to do, because when we do this online, in the next step, there's Facebook, WhatsApp is on the smartphone, of course, YouTube is in the next step. It's hard to cope with these distractions. This is why we have to move to a lean-forward experience. Where does that come from? Lean backward is the regular experience that you have with the TV set. Lean forward is the experience that you have with games. The hand on the mouse, and on the screen there is no Facebook and whatsoever. It's just the game with gaming. That's something we should be aiming at with educational video as well. The MOOCs went one vital step in that direction. Adding tons of quizzes, that may be the way to go. This is from my own MOOC at Udacity, one single unit, one single lecture if you will, one single unit, and there's tons of quizzes in between. Every one of these dots is one quiz, which means that you have to keep the videos as such pretty short. So that's a regular size Udacity video, 1 minute 49 seconds. Really short videos, and after 1 or 2 minutes of video, there's a quiz. 1 or 2 minutes of video, there's a quiz. This is not a lean backward experience, this is a lean forward experience. Again, quizzes are not that new. The behaviorists started to do that teaching by quizzes in the 50s, which is pretty much old school. So today's specialists in didactics would say, that's not the thing we should be doing, just teaching facts with quizzes, but then again it worked. So some stuff really does work. You can really teach something with this sort of quizzes. And there is some recent work on quizzes in the context of MOOCs. So students stay focused. Not very surprising, but now we have research to support that. Quizzes, interleaved quizzes help staying focused, not to mind wander and open Facebook, for instance. I guess there's 3 types of quizzes. This would be the very, very basic sort of quiz, a brain pacemaker, if you will, or a dead man's switch, just checking if the audience is still there, if everybody is listening. The tricky thing is that in many cases this tends to be brain dead, like this question here from an Australian MOOC. Adult learners appreciate having the purpose of the session stated at the beginning. False or true? Is that university level? Shouldn't we be knowing that answer without watching any video? So I guess we can have a higher level than that. We should be aiming at a higher level of quizzes than that. The second level that I see of quizzes are finger exercises. Skill and drill is not really very much like university, but then again, you have to know how to form the derivative, you have to know how to add 2 fractions, stuff like that. This is skill and drill. Be that as it may, we can do that with finger exercises as quizzes, or add a little more depth, like I try here on Udacity. Ask a question where you really have to do some computation on paper, say for 2 or 3 minutes. And the third type of quiz that I see are really problems, not quizzes, but indeed problems. You try to prompt self-explanations. That's another insight from didactics. If you prompt self-explanations, if the students have to try and explain the material for themselves. This is highly effective in terms of learning. Or you use quizzes for discovery. You push the students in the right direction, trying to make them discover some mathematical or biological or whatever phenomenon, some issue with the stuff that you've presented before. Strategy, you can ask about what the right approach would be. Would you start with this step? Would you start with that step? What would be more intelligent to do? And some mini projects. In the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, in the STEM field we tend to present knowledge nuggets, if you will, atoms of knowledge. Quizzes are a chance, or problems, as larger quizzes are a chance to integrate all of these nuggets into something meaningful. Again, creating some effect to learning. This is one example from my Udacity course, where you have to discover something. In the video before, I derived this equation, well, almost equation. This estimate is something that I derived in the video before. And now I asked the student to do the transfer, to go from the second derivative to the fourth derivative. How would you do that? That involves thinking, not just regurgitating information. In computer science, of course, it's pretty easy to make the students think on this electronic platform by developing software, that is. So most of the Udacity MOOCs, some of the Coursera MOOCs, some of the edX MOOCs comprise programming tasks. This is from my own again. So there's a framework given to the student, and the student has to fill in his or her own code, your code here. Some lines of code, make it work. Simulation is to be developed here. You see the result of the simulation as a curve or some other diagram and have to get that straight. This really fosters thinking. And it helps to integrate everything. You have to know about the numerical solution of differential equations. You have to know about Python as a programming language. You have to take the model and reformulate it as mathematics and so on. It's an integrative task, not just atomic knowledge. The lean-forward experience is something that stems from games. So let's borrow from games. Games obviously work in terms of user engagement, so let's borrow from games. Gamification. What everybody tries to do is, I guess, the shallow type of gamification, to look like a game, to have fancy graphics, to have high scores, points, badges. In particular, the Khan Academy uses tons and tons of badges. You watch a video, you get a badge. I guess this is a rather shallow approach to gamification. I would look for a deep approach to be captivating like a game, to keep the user engaged, to provide challenge and reward on a deeper level, not just with glitzy graphics. That's something I'm trying on my own platform that's developed with Robin Woll. We're trying to unify videos and quizzes. The quizzes do not appear separately from the video, they are part of that video. For instance, in that video we ask about the next step, what's going to happen now. But also there's finger exercises and there's prompt for self-explanations. And there's a range of ideas from gamification. So that's one of my regular lecture recordings on YouTube. But now there's quizzes layered on top of that YouTube video. So the video subjects, someone will reach the first quiz. I just jumped to the first quiz. So that's part of the video right now. Before I explain in the video what the slope is, I ask the student to think about the slope. And time is running. One aspect of gamification. Okay, that was right. And so on and so on. We aim at having a quiz every 30 seconds. So not every 2 minutes, but every 30 seconds. So what happens when I plug in 1 for that x? That would be 2. And so on and so on. These questions are HTML layered on top of that YouTube video. Here, for instance, we ask about the line. Which of these 4 lines does have a slope of 100%, a slope of 1? So that's this line, for instance, like that. So we try to integrate quizzes, completely integrate quizzes with the video, and to have a lean production. The videos are just my old lecture recordings, nothing new. These are some ideas about lean production and lean production and lean forward experience. Let's try to do that. What we're aiming at is not a collection of lectures. It's very short videos, it's rather an encyclopedia of tutorials. There's no chat yet, there's no crowdsourcing, of course, and we're working on an offline version. Somebody mentioned Africa before. There's also regions in Germany with poor internet connections. That's one of the reasons why we want to provide an offline version. Privacy is another reason. It's running on your computer and nobody gets these data. And it starts out with the remedial course in mathematics at the lower end, and at the upper end there will be a course on relativity. The bigger scope in didactics is to get rid of this collection of facts and go to a complete story rather than a collection of facts. For instance, the quadratic equation. Who of you used the quadratic equation this year? I have expected that. Who of you had to learn this in school? I guess almost everybody, yeah. I don't need to ask. So the question for me really is, does this make sense? And this is just one instance. In mathematics, I teach stuff like the Laplace transform, like Taylor series, and things like that, which most of the students hardly ever use in their real life. We have this strong focus on subject matter, But actually, we do not use that subject matter. Even worse, we do not teach what is important to teach. And this is again something that has been known for decades. Physicists know that their students do not grasp the idea of force, Newtonian force. In 1985, this force concept inventory came into being. Questions about force, nothing to compute, just basic questions. You drop something from a plane. What would be the trajectory of that thing that you dropped from a plane? Students are not able or almost not able to answer these questions correctly. They can do weird computations, but they do not know what force is. Nothing new. There's this video from Harvard, a private university. Harvard graduates are asked about the seasons. Why do we have summer? Why do we have winter? Why do we have spring? Why do we have fall? They don't know, actually. They give wrong explanations. There are studies on what engineers actually use in their job. Squared or cubed is the most complex thing you do. You've got the Laplace transform and Taylor series in your studies, but actually what you do on the job is square a number. Great. And what I know from my own students, after the second year, the idea of proportionality is lost. It was there in the first year, but it's lost in the second year. How to solve a linear equation, also something that tends to be lost in the second year. Lots of subject matter, but it's lost. At school, you always hear you're going to need that in university, and in the university you hear you're going to need that on your job, but I guess in most cases that's not true. The half-life of knowledge and skills is pretty short in one's occupation, and it's even shorter in one's head. Use it or lose it. If you learn something in the first year of university, it's going to be lost when you enter the job, if you never used it after that first year. So what I'd say is we have to move beyond the idea of a single video. We have to look at the grand scheme of things, tell a whole story. Maybe that's storytelling, like what Hollywood does. One aspect that I would borrow from Hollywood, tell a story. There's a huge number of methods for that, problem-based teaching, project-based teaching. I love this term by Roger Schank, story-centered curriculum. That's what I tried on Udacity. And actually that's what's happening in many Udacity courses. Many Udacity courses are built around a story. Create a robotic car, create a search engine. In my case, every unit has its own story. Actually, the first two have one common story, Rescue Apollo 13. Unit 5 is about how to build an anti-lock braking system. And that involves all sorts of subjects. It's not just mathematics, existence and uniqueness of the solutions of differential equations. No. Actually, that's hardly covered at all. This is going through a huge range of subjects. So it's about physics. What is friction? How do you describe friction? How do you describe a car? The physics, the mechanics of a car. It's about mathematics. Solving specific equations. It's about numerics, how to numerically solve differential equations, and so on. It's even about psychology. If you have an anti-lock braking system, you may drive faster than before, and hence nothing is gained. So, to conclude, what I think has to be done is the following. 3 issues. I guess we have to think about that we are not doing Hollywood. It's rather the back of a napkin. That's a term by Dan Rome. There's 2 books on that, the back of the napkin. This is something we have to have in mind. It's not about production value, it's about learning in the end. And it's about what works in games. You have to do something like the games do, the lean-forward experience. Quizzes may be the easiest way, and the MOOCs show this seems to be working. This approach attracts a huge number of people. And on the grand scheme of things, tell a story. Do not present atoms that are not connected. Present the complete story, which is far better in terms of learning. Thanks a lot.